Go on.
Okay. Do I need to use the mic? Okay. Well, in a way,
It's not working.
not working. No, this is true. We'll do without it. Is it working? It's fragile. Okay. In a way, I already spoke about that this morning, but when I heard the question 5 minutes ago, a lot of things came to my mind, and the first thing was, I was raised or educated as a psychiatrist and a psychotherapist with the idea that there was something wrong with people. And we had these ideas of these ideals of how people should be. Like Freud and Jung and Reich and Pearls, they had all ideas about how people should be. And for me, what Buddhism at least brought to me is that there is no way people should be. People just suffer. And what we have to do, and there's a second thing, the direct antidote, the direct response to suffering is compassion. That means to be with them and be ready and to be open to that and not to shy away from that and just be ready to be with someone who suffers. And be ready to listen to that and be ready to try to share that and try to understand that. And then another thing that came to my mind. Yes? Yes? Yes. Okay. Another thing that another thing that came to my mind was what was it? Was that actually Buddhism has a lot of interesting ideas and theories, and one of the most important to me is that in Freudian psychoanalysis, in behaviorism, actually people are defined by pleasure and displeasure, are defined by reward and punishment, and basically that's the same thing. And it's as if that's the only thing that defines us. And one of the things that I learned from Buddhism is that, okay, that's true that we are defined or we are motivated, among other things, by pleasure and displeasure and all that. But it's not the only thing. Yeah? Actually, these things are what in Buddhism are called poisons, which sometimes very often makes our life very difficult. And there's something else. There is compassion, there is love or loving kindness or whatever you want to know, you call it, and there is joy, and there is equanimity and openness. Yeah. Let's call it the four Brahma Viharas. There's something else which in a way is deeper than all these things that cloud it. Yeah? And then the fourth thing came to my mind, and then I will stop. Buddhism also has a lot of interesting techniques to offer, like meditation, for instance, and we can use them, and that's what we do. Okay. How many minutes was that?
It's about 4
About
minutes.
5.
Go on, give it a check. Up here, no, up here.
So, for me it's a very difficult question, because I must say that I don't know nothing about Buddhism in this way, that I know some quotes of the Dalai Lama. For example, if you think you are too small to make a difference, try to sleep with a mosquito in your room. So they are, what I studied, I'm a physiotherapist. So I'm a physiotherapist who wants to treat a person. So we developed a method and a concept, and in my lecture they refer very often to Buddhism. So, and my first book I read about Buddhism is this one, and I put the paper when it is interesting, so there are a lot of papers. I arrived already on page 89. So, and there are a lot of things here in this book. They are very useful in our therapy. And if we want to treat a person, and also we meditate in our treatment, and we have a contemplative attitude, and we work also, we learn to listen to our patients, and say we want to evaluate the patient. Am I clear? That the patient have as much value as a therapist, and we try to understand his problem, and we try to help him from an attitude of compassion. So I think there are many similarities between the two streamings. So, and in fact, it was an honor to me to be here, and that I could give a lecture and a workshop, and I came for hours here too. I came mostly, maybe the most important thing for me is to learn from you. So I'm here as a student, and I'm very pleased to be here, and I hope I will learn much tomorrow and after tomorrow in the workshops also. So I want to discover the similarities and discover also the differences, and what difference can be useful, what difference is not so interesting, I don't know. And so that's the aim for my presence here. So I apologize for my not knowing and my English. Yes, but it seems I am a beginner in Buddhism, and it seems very, very interesting. So I hope is to learn more and more and more. Just one problem, time. If you are studying a lot of days a week, you cannot work. I mean, you don't work, you don't earn money, and if you are again interested in another thing which is very interesting, we need more time to learn and to study. So I will look gently to my wife. She supported me enormously, so thank you. Voilà, and I think, yeah, very interesting, the contemplative attitudes, the meditations, the way I learned from Varela how to use our attention. So it was very helpful. Yeah. Thank you. Still. Thank you. Are you sure?
Good evening, everybody. Well, I learned a lesson, so I will say it in the first place, like Paul would say, please excuse me if my English is not so standard. As to this topic, I thought about it just like 20 minutes ago, and I realized I thought it in the wrong way, or at least not in the in this way, because it says what Buddhism brings to the world of contemporary therapies. I was thinking in such a sentence, what Buddhism has brought to the world of contemporary therapies. So the different shades of meaning. So what I was thinking is, like therapists, like you, everybody has known something like MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction. People were mentioning this in the morning. And MBCT, mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. And also acceptance and commitment therapy. Dialectical behavior therapy, DBT. All these four have been wonderful examples of what Buddhism has brought to contemporary therapies, because each of these four therapies have apparently a very good element from Buddhism, as far as I know, but they use different words. Mindfulness, which is a core of Buddhism, although they may not say, at least as far as I know, John Kabat-Zinn is not trying to relate his version of mindfulness to Buddhism. David may talk more about that. I will leave room for him so that he will not have nothing to talk about.
Don't worry.
And I really don't have to worry, because David says you can talk first and talk last twice. So long story short, 5 minutes, I don't have the time. So my gut feeling is almost halfway past. The first time I learned, the Buddhist contribution to psychotherapy, modern psychotherapy, is actually reading a book by Mark Epstein, simply called Thinking Without a Thinker. Thoughts without a thinker. And the subtitle is Psychotherapy from a Buddhist Perspective, which was published in 1995, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
And it says that one of the commentators of the book says, since this book was published, psychotherapy would be out of date if they don't talk about something like Buddhism. If they don't mention anything about Buddhism or meditation, then that psychotherapy is out of date. Very impressive comment. Said, oh wow, what a contribution of Buddhism has brought to psychotherapy. So that's what I was thinking about. Now, when I came to the room, I see what Buddhism brings to the world of contemporary therapies. So not just in the past, right? So then I said, okay, what else can Buddhism bring to contemporary psychotherapists? Probably spirituality. Because these guys, John Kabat-Zinn, as a representative, they don't acknowledge spirituality. They say it's a neutral scientific practice. And maybe in private places he talks about this, but at least in his published books, I was trying to look for something. He talks about spirituality, but he was not really acknowledging that in a way I would, or some people here would expect him to do. So maybe there's something more in it, which is deeper than just being mindful moment by moment of my thoughts, my feelings, my sensations, my images. Okay, time is up, right? So there's something transcendental, and which is really going to bring you, beyond samsara, beyond the end of suffering. And that's something these guys haven't talked about much, and I'll leave it to David.
Thank you. As for chaps sitting here in a row, I can't help being taken back. About 10 days ago, I was doing a demonstration therapy session in Korea, and I'm sitting here. and the client was a woman, was sitting there, and I said, what would you like to talk about? And she said, well, I noticed that, you know, I do work in hospitals and so on, and I notice that I have a different feeling and attitude when I'm dealing with women patients and when I'm dealing with men patients, you see. And so I said, well, we've got a few men here, you see, like this. And I said, when you look that way, what comes to mind, you see? And she said, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. so I think we're four of the seven dwarfs here. I'm not quite sure which ones, but anyway, this is a complete aside. It has nothing to do with it. What does Buddhism bring to contemplative therapies? Well, of course, I can talk about psychotherapy, but there are obviously other therapies. Well, what does it bring? It brings Buddhism. You know, the Buddha started his teaching talking about dukkha, about suffering, affliction. You might say the dark side of life, and this was his realization was that, or one way of looking at what he said about it is that one must face it. Yes, that one must not spend one's whole existence running away from it. That we shouldn't be in flight. That when dukkha arises, things come up in us. Yes, it doesn't matter how much training you've done, how much you try to control yourself and so on. If something tragic happened now, you would have a change in your state. Yes, you would not sit there like a lump of wood. This is not, we're human, yes? The energy will come up. And what do you do with that energy? You see, the question is not to try and make oneself into something insensitive. The question is, what do you do with the sensitivity? What do you do with the energy that arises? Yes. And he pointed out that, you know, this energy that comes up, samudaya and so on, in the normal case, very often simply results in more dukkha. Yeah? What do? We go and drink whiskey or something, and then the next day we have a headache on top of whatever it was that, you know, or whatever. You know, we have innumerable habits for escaping, and very often these multiply the suffering for ourselves, for other people, like that. But they're not the only option. There are other ways that we can go. Yes, and so the whole kind of unfolding of Buddhist teaching is the myriad different ways that he taught what else you can do with that energy, one way or another. And the general import of it is that if you use that energy in a certain way, it doesn't result in producing more dukkha for you and everybody else. It puts you on what's called marga. It puts you onto a spiritual path. So yes, it brings spirituality. Yeah, and that spiritual path is a kind of liberation. Yes? So I think one of the great things that Buddhism brings to psychotherapy, to therapy, to life generally, is an attitude towards liberation. We talk a great deal about getting away from suffering, and everybody wants to be happy and so on. Let's say another 5 minutes to let me. But I think what it's really about is a noble, creative, constructive life. which is, in Buddhism is called enlightenment, you know, or liberation. Thank you very much. Okay, well, what do we do now? So now I think we need something from Snow White.
Snow White.
I have black hair, but I feel like white. You know, white, Snow White. So you said that you are looking at this man here, and so yes, I have to contribute something as a woman. For me, I wanted to say that for me, what Buddhism brought, has brought, or keep bringing to my therapy is mainly the coexistence. I mean,
Coexistence.
yes. I mean, you can call it anatta, you can call it non-duality, you can call it interbeing, coexistence of the therapist and the client. Which means for me that to give a session, to make a therapy session, is something which is happening between two of us. And for me, you know, it's like Buddhism is more advanced than the new perspectives in relational and clinical psychology, which are speaking about intersubjective, but it is about dealing and healing the coexistence, and this is the coexistence between, it's not that the therapist knows everything and this is for me the here and now. That's why when you were talking about here and now, this is the here and now when both of us, the therapist and the client, just equal parts of the coexistence are inquiring something and plunging into it and having maybe, as you said before, David, some sort of enlightenment, some sort of transformation. So for me this is the contribution of Buddhism to therapy. And maybe it might be not only with psychological therapy, maybe it might be also in other kinds of therapy, even in physicians or I don't know about these parts of therapy. Thank you.
I also have questions. Maybe I ask questions. I like that very much, this description of being in it's like therapist and the client are somehow in the same space, not knowing and just receiving and looking for how do we deal with this suffering by embracing it, by admitting it, by facing it, not throwing it away or not pushing it away, but just be there together. Yes, so this resonates.
May I say, I'm now retired, thank goodness, from psychotherapy, and I think one of the things that Buddhism in my life has brought to the world of psychotherapy that I worked in was courage. Just simple courage. The courage to say, I won't do that. I won't be that way. And that's what the practice does. It gives you courage. Courage to be kind and compassionate. Simple. So, that's it from me.
Yeah, very nice. Yeah.
For me, that rings a bell. For me, I don't know so much about Buddhism, but what I once read is the other is you. And whenever I'm with a client, I'm a new coach, hopefully I'll be a psychotherapist one day. And I'm always very anxious when a new client comes, because I'm thinking, am I going to do the right thing? Am I the best person to help this person? And then I think, okay, make a connection, not an impression, first and foremost. And then the other is you. Just that, first of all, you meet each other as humans. And then you meet each other in the role of therapist and client, or whatever it is. But it takes courage to show your vulnerability also as in the helping profession. Yeah, well, that's what I wanted to add.
Yes, I think that's right. Am I the best person to be helping this person? Well, probably not. But I'm what they've got. So I have a certain obligation.
I recognize that also when I was just a starting psychiatrist. I remember the panic of entering the waiting room and asking the patient to come in. And this feeling of, I don't know myself either. And it took me some time to realize that I don't know it myself was the best thing I had to offer. So keep that.
Yes, thank you. Thank
Yeah,
you for that.
it reminds me, when I first started doing group work, I was persuaded by somebody else. Would I help co-facilitate groups, encounter groups? It was back in those days. And I was terrified. I have rarely been so frightened. And I think if a large carnivorous beast had walked into the room, I would not have been as frightened as I was facing these groups. And then one day I had a sort of mini enlightenment. I had a sudden, complete flip, because it occurred to me that the people in the group were probably as frightened of me as I was of them. So from then on, I really concentrated on trying not to make them frightened. And this somehow took away my self-preoccupation. And I think that's quite a good example, really, of the sort of basic Buddhist principle. If I'm thinking about how well am I doing, well, one certainly needs an awful lot of courage in that situation. You know, but if your mind is on the other, different things happen.
Well, when I was listening to the conversation, I realized indeed probably the biggest contribution from Buddhism to psychotherapy, particularly to psychotherapist, he or herself, is what I now call grounding. Grounding myself as a therapist. Unless I can ground myself, there's no way for me to be not frightened, not anxious, not understanding, not empathic. Rogers, I suspected Rogers actually was probably a secret follower of Buddhist practice. Although he cited he was more like Taoist in terms of Chinese influence, from Chinese influence. Apparently so Rogers maybe not the best person, but also in the afternoon somebody was teaching non-violent communication by Marshall Rosenberg, a disciple of Rogers. And when I was teaching humanistic practice, when I was teaching humanistic psychology to my people in China, I told them Rogers has never told you how he can, be so empathic and how he can be so, unconditionally positive regard, and what's the third thing? Listen.
Congruence.
Congruence, yeah, congruence. Congruence may be something different, empathic and listening, especially Marshall Rosenberg, non-violent communication. Non-violent, you have to be able to really empathically listening, whatever happens. But they never say how you can be there. I figured out, well, this is something I can contribute. So when I was teaching non-NEC, I have to ask my students to, let's practice meditation first. And grounding, particularly I use the word grounding in Chinese, anzhu, grounding myself. So without doing that, I think that to me now is the most probably the most distinctive contribution that Buddhism can bring to psychotherapy in general and to the psychotherapist in particular.
I think that I learned to listen to my patients. I learned that on my meditation course and not in my training as a psychiatrist. And that may be strange, but I realized sometimes at the very beginning or when I was in training that sometimes someone told a terrible story and I said, okay, please tell, say it. And I realized that in myself everything said, I don't want to hear it. This is too terrible. And that even while saying you can tell it, actually the message I gave was please do not tell it. And it's only by sitting on my cushion and being present with my own pain and my own sadness and all these things that I gradually learned when someone comes with great sadness, that then at that moment I know, and courage, okay, we can call it courage, that I can say, okay, please, you're welcome. And then I learned the question. I didn't learn that in my training as a psychiatrist.
I also think as a Buddhist therapist, you practice yourself to be compassionate. And I read in the book of Ricard Mathieu about altruism. He wrote the difference between empathy and compassion. And I think a lot of, before I had my Buddhistic training or exercise, I was empathic. Do you see it, empathic?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I feel the suffering more than the love. And they did experience with Mathieu Ricard on his brains. And when he saw a movie of something very painful, the region in his brains of love lighted up and not of pain. And I believe it's possible when you train yourself, you can open more compassion by being to have non-discrimination with what happens and to the common humanity you feel with the other person. And that's what brought to me as a therapist, the difference of being truly there, just in the common humanity and non-discrimination, and the compassion instead of the empathy. It's only a word in some way, but it feels different for me.
I think for me, I'm a psychiatrist as well, and a psychotherapist. For me, I think Buddhism has a lot to do with trust. With trust in a way that you trust yourself as a therapist, for instance, or as a person who takes care of someone, as well as trust in the patient. And there is something which which you can call the inner Buddha, or the Buddha within, which is really which is, for me, it's a very, very important contribution from Buddhism, that anyone and every being has the same essence, and that you relate to this essence in terms of interconnectedness, not to be blown away by karma, just in a holding function, in a natural bonding, which is just based on this essence. And this had been very important to me, and I remember that I got a kind of proof of that. I heard a lot of teachings, Buddhist teachings, and I'm very grateful to my teachers that I got this teaching, but the proof I got in my work when I worked on a closed unit in the psychiatric hospital, and I had a lady doctor, you know, a Snow White lady doctor, and she was very small, and one day a very, very huge psychotic patient came into completely bound by police because he just appeared naked on the main road, conducting the traffic. And this, my lady teacher here, my doctor, doctor in charge, she just did one. She just said one word to him, and he really was bursting out. You know, she only said one word to him, and he started crying. You know, because she referred to his essence in a way, not being Buddhist, but being compassionate and at the same time hitting the point. And this was quite impressive to me. And therefore, I think if you relate to a group or you relate to people, it's a bit like in a Shaolin monastery where monks meet each other and say Omi Tofu, and the other guy and the other monk says Omi Tofu. It's just a recognition of what you are in the essence, and I think this is a very, very important contribution. Thank you.
I also think it's a very hopeful time. Like when I was trained in mindfulness in the early 90s, it was really, you know, alternative and not so normal. And now mindfulness is mainstream. And all the contemplative practices and what Buddhism can bring to the world is not only for in the therapeutic world, but also like in the medical world. There's a lot of interest, like Joan Halifax teaches all over the world contemplative practices, like how to cultivate compassion in all the helping professions. And that wouldn't have happened 20 years ago, but now it's more accepted and also embraced, and people see the contribution of it to what's already there, how it can enrich what's already happening. So I find that's very hopeful.
It's the same with the word love. Some years ago, you may not speak about love as it was soft, and now even sometimes in politics or even more and more you hear about love. They dare to as you say, mindfulness, but also dare to speak about love as a reality. And I'm also happy with, hopeful with that. The hate is coming bigger, but the love is also becoming more visible.
Well, all these ideas I'm listening to, are connecting in my mind with a word which is encounter, and that's what I think that is one of the main things that Buddhism brings to contemporary therapies. Because precisely when for this encounter, in order to be possible, this encounter, we have to, as therapists, we cannot be in the first place. We cannot go on thinking about what to do or what is the best thing. The focus is not put on I myself, but I have to put it on the other, as David said before. And then needs confidence, and also this needs courage at the same time. So we need courage, and where do I obtain or cultivate this courage? This is the question. So Buddhism is not so for me. It's not something simple or something that I can resume in a simple word. That if we talk about encounter, we talk about trust or confidence. Finally, we are talking about something greater than me or the other. Simply, we are. So I'm not being very clear, but it's because I cannot resume this question in a simple word. And maybe if I had to choose one word, it would be encounter, and what it implies. And well, that's what I think it.
Yes, and it sounds like you're also saying something about a kind of bigger picture.
Yes, because as you said before, if you start to thinking about the other mainly, you said things are easy. But to think mainly in the other, you need to soltar something that you are taking on.
Yes, to go beyond.
Yeah, and special courage is needed. So this special courage doesn't appear, sometimes appears suddenly, but I think something else, something bigger is present. So it's not, for me, it's not so simple, it's not so, it implies a lot. But from one word, from one idea, all the rest develops. I don't know if I'm explaining properly, but well, I think that the real encounter implies the rest. That's what I think.
Some years ago, I had a conversation with a Shin Buddhist priest in London, actually, and I asked him, what did faith mean in Buddhism? And without a second thought, he said encounter. And I've thought about that so many times since then. It's like a sort of koan that works away. You know, to actually commit oneself to sort of the magic unpredictability of what happens when you open your heart to another person, without the sort of safety net of a protocol or something, it's extremely challenging.
another idea listening to you is that maybe as a therapist or coach, it's a very humbling experience. So maybe that's also something to be humble. It's like when the client or the patient is doing well, it's because he has the resources. It's not because of you. And if something doesn't work out, it's because I didn't do the invitation in the right way. This doesn't come from me. I just saw a video last night of solution-focused brief therapy that I practiced. And that was a stunning idea. And it's this idea of humbleness also takes courage, because you cannot, when something goes well, you're not the one that takes the credit for it. It is the client. Yeah. So, yeah.
I was just thinking that the own practice is so important. The main thing to do is the own practice. You can discuss and think and read and talk, and it's inspiring. But I think, as you say, when it's not you, it's the client, and I agree with that. But I hope you can do something by really being there. And you asked this morning, what is gem or something? I didn't know the words. What is the gem? I thought you asked this morning. What is the thing that works? When Edel was talking, you asked, what is the thing that works? What makes it work or something?
Very likely, but I can't remember.
Nevertheless, I think what for me, I hope that what works is the own practice of the therapist and nothing more or less. If there's something that works.
What I think that, of course, as a therapist, you are the expert, but on the other hand, you always have to learn from your patient or your client, and it's your expertise and information that you receive as a therapist that can give the patient an insight in his problem. And second, as you say, you have to practice. So I think it is. I think a therapist must give the tools and must learn the tools to the patient to help himself, so he can help really himself, and he can exercise at home. Because I am not a psychotherapist. So I don't have the clients who come to psychotherapist. If I am in a problem with a client or a patient, and I say perhaps you can go to a psychotherapist, he don't want to do it. His first reaction, I'm not a fool. You see, my clients are really people who don't know nothing about psychotherapy or psychology, and they are afraid of it. So I think as a physiotherapist you have to give the tools to perceive better and to know them better, and we do it by movement and by body awareness. And so little by little step they discover themselves, and they begin to see their real problems. And then our role is finished, I think. And then they can go to the psychiatrist or the psychologist or the psychotherapist, or we can work together. But I think we, as therapists, you have to learn from your patients.
Well, seems like the difference between different approaches. Paul was probably referring to, like CBT would say, of course, I'm an expert as a therapist. And humanistic psychologists say, no, maybe, I'm really not person-centered. So more like what you say, humble as a therapist. Humble. It's all because of the client's own understanding and his own work. going to talk about this along this line. What I was thinking, this title again, we're talking about what Buddhism brings or has brought to psychotherapists. We seem to be sure what Buddhism is all about, assuming we have some kind of a conformity to that, and that is actually a big question, isn't it? And I immediately realized, there's no monk here except General Martin, probably. He's the wrong monk, you're not a monk. Okay. You are, okay. Well, you appear like a lay Buddhist. A lay nun. A nun is a nun. A lay Buddhist, a lay Buddhist. I'm a lay Buddhist. Not a lazy Buddhist. I'm a lay Buddhist.
Lazy Buddhist.
I don't call myself a lazy Buddhist. I call myself a lay Buddhist. Okay? I practice at home. I thought about becoming a monk in the Chinese Chan Buddhist monastery, very traditionally very accredited, but I didn't succeed. So instead I went to America to study religion psychology with my PhD in East-West psychology. So it's huge, talking Buddhism here with all lay or lazy Buddhists, and talking about Buddhism in China with the monks and the nuns is totally different thing. Completely different thing. So what I would say is we are probably talking about what might be known in China as humanistic Buddhism. Just this part of Buddhism that is improving our daily life, our human relationship, healing at this part. And it's not about a liberation beyond samsara, about the afterlife. That's what they talk about a lot more. So I'm very much into humanistic Buddhism because I'm a lay Buddhist and I've studied psychology. I'm more concerned about the welfare of this life as much as I am concerned with my next life, if possible. So psychotherapy, I place them differently. As I was talking to David, there's a huge, development on the dialogue between Buddhism and psychotherapy in China as well. I know a monastery, major monastery in China, which has hosted 6 conferences on this topic. The last conference happened in 2015. I was invited to be a speaker, and they had 500 attendees, audience. It was a huge hit, but it was in the monastery, and psychotherapy was supposed to support the idea that psychotherapy is really a minor, and Buddhism is a major in terms of healing. Of course, again, they will talk about ultimate concern, something like that. So I ended up saying yes. We need to place them differently. Psychotherapy at human level, humanistic level, this worldly level, and Buddhism at the transcendental level. Although they may have places of interface, they have shared common grounds, of course, but mainly I have to say they need to be looked at differently from different levels or dimensions.
I think what I've learned from Buddhism is that the therapist as expert has compassion with the suffering of the client, but the therapist have really compassion with the suffering from the client when he also have compassion with the client in itself. Also, when you see also the suffering in itself, and also have compassion with that. Then it is possible to have a good relation and a good compassion for the client, I think. That brings Buddhism for me. Yeah. Am I clear?
Only small remark on the person just now, that from all these things that we've said here, like the courage and the humbleness and vulnerability and not knowing, I think in Buddhist therapy, the therapist has an opportunity or a privilege to be healed as much as his client. And this is a great privilege for us. It's not only learning from the client, but being healed by the client or by the interbeing with the guide of the psychotherapy. And this is something, when I was young therapist, I thought that when I get something, when I have some contribution to myself, to my problems, to my conflicts from the psychotherapy, it's wisdom. I think that it's part of this. I think this is our privilege as Buddhist therapists.
Yes, I in a way like to pick up on what Kai said, because I teach in the West and in the East, and it's certainly true that the reception by the groups is completely different. People talk about completely different things. They receive what I say in a completely different way. So, what is Buddhism? And I thought it was quite well illustrated. I read an article in an anthology about Buddhism and psychotherapy. I think it was in there. And there was an article about a retreat that had taken place in America, but half of the retreat group were Chinese, and half of the retreat group were Americans. And it's been a silent retreat. There had been Dharma talks by the teacher. So they'd all, in a sense, if you think about it scientifically, they'd all had the same input. Experimental conditions were the same for everybody. There'd been no discussion or anything. They all sat in silent meditation and they received the same Dharma talks. At the end of the whatever it was, 7 days or something, they were finally allowed to share and to talk about their experience of the retreat. And what it said in this article was that typical of almost all the Western people who had participated in the retreat said things like, "This is going to have been really helpful to me. It'll resolve problems in my life. It'll make me more effective as a person. It's changed me in a lot of ways." And the Chinese all said things like, I feel distraught. I just want to go back and apologize to my parents and tell them how awful I've been." And, it's a completely different attitude, which had come out of exactly the same, supposedly, experience. But the cultural frame and the idea of what Buddhism is all about and what you're supposed to learn from it, and so on, quite different. Quite apart from there being differences of teaching and doctrine, and some people believe in, I don't know, interbeing and some don't, and all that sort of thing, there's a kind of more global cultural thing. There's something paradigmatic. And Buddhism is being received in the West and fitted into a framework of some kind, and we're creating a Western Buddhism, but it's not a replica of Chinese or Korean or Vietnamese Buddhism is something a bit different.
Just come to mind what Buddhism brings to therapies. Mo and I were having a meeting with some psychology colleagues in Jersey, and we're having a discussion about patient relationships. And one of the psychologists, we put it to, if it was a rainy day and one of your patients was at the bus stop getting soaking wet, would you give them a lift if you passed by? Oh no, they said, no, we couldn't do that. That would compromise something. Yeah. And I think the difference is that we would have. We'd stop and give them a lift. And it's as simple as that.
Probably a humanist psychologist would do it. I'm a psychoanalyst.
I'm a psychoanalyst, but I think, yes, well...
Transpersonal psychologists will do it, most likely. It transcends the boundaries.
That makes me also wonder to which extent all the rich elements that we explored tonight are exclusively related to Buddhism. Most of the elements I heard I can somehow relate to other currents as well. Like, I also like very much encounter or relationality, but that's also covered by social constructionist approach to therapy or whatever. So, is it perennial wisdom or is it Buddhism?
Well, I think it's a very good question, you know, and how much are we receiving Buddhism and being changed by it, and how much are we changing Buddhism and importing into it a whole load of supposedly progressive, supposedly humanistic Western values, some of which may have very little to do with the original teaching. And I think this is it's not the topic that we're talking about tonight, but it's a very big, live, real topic.
And how much did Buddhism change when it came from India to China? It's the same thing. It became totally what we call the signification of Buddhism. It changed totally. And, well, that's a very interesting process going on. And that's a huge topic in itself, which is bigger than any conference.
Perhaps the question should be reversed and asked what contemporary therapies or...
Bringing to Buddhism. Well, yes, exactly.
I think what Ketan was saying before about do we have an idea of what Buddhism is, and maybe we won't have an idea of what Buddhism is because it's changing. The principles of Buddhism it's changing all the time, and it reminds me of the Prajna Paramita. Buddhism is always becoming, always going on and going on. So once we feel we've got a blueprint about what Buddhism is, it's not there anymore. So it's a very big dynamic.
Well, I will dissent from this. I think it's difficult for us to reach what is truly Buddhism. I agree. But the idea that Buddhism is kind of infinitely malleable and could be anything depending on what circumstance or culture it ended up in, I don't agree. I think there are, I think we do well to try and delve into, as best we can, granted it's very difficult, what is Buddhism really all about, because it's a goldmine. And if we simply think we can remake it and tack Buddhist terminology onto our favoured ideas, I think we miss out. We lose a great deal.
I agree this is a huge topic and it's beyond our capability within 1 hour, 10 hours.
Or
so,
10 minutes we've got.
And I also agree with adult. There's a signification, we call a signification of Indian Buddhism in China. And there's maybe an Americanization of Buddhism or Europeanization of Buddhism. But looking about the lifestyle of the monastics across the world, they have something more solid, more. It's also changing. Thich Nhat's order here in France may be quite different from ancient orders, but but still they have something similar. They are wearing their robes. They have their head shaved, and they have to practice. And they read something. I think they read some basic sutras at least. Again, probably it's cultural difference. Indeed, bigger than the time changing. Well, I'm not sure whether I can make it a point. What I want to get across is, if we try to proclaim that we are practicing Buddhism, probably it's necessary to really go back to some resources, whatever sutras, Nichiren or Pure Land Buddhism, Zen Buddhism, or Indian Theravada Buddhism. You can say this is our denomination, our tradition. They can be different anyway, but they have similarities. At least they have what I would say. I'm not trying to get this across, but what I'm trying to say is, after all, Buddhism is a religion. It's not just a humanistic practice, because they do care a lot about the ultimate concern. We might just be concerned, psychotherapy or Buddhist psychotherapy, I don't know David's version, okay? Is it just about this life, improving our human relationship with my spouse, with my boss, as with myself, or is it, does it have something, beyond? So this is probably the borderline, the watershed between Buddhism as a religion and Buddhism as a human practice or scientific practice or psychological practice.
I was so glad that the question was what Buddhism brings to the world of contemporary therapies. And now we're going to, but is it really Buddhism? I admit it's a very interesting